in this. And so, with all due respect, I think stay away with things that relate to the special counsel as like where this is about anyway.
By refusing to condemn attacks on the special counsel, I mean really over-the-line attacks that aren't shared by Republicans here in Congress, you are frustrating the work of the special counsel because you're associating yourself with some very poisonous political attacks.
Senator, I have worked diligently myself, and I have put demands on the team that works for me to go out of our way to make sure we were delivering for each of those 3 investigations. And it is difficult. They've asked for complex information that was classified. We've shared information that goes well beyond what has previously been shared, and we've done so with the aim of ensuring that the special counsel and the Senate Intelligence and House Intelligence Committee have the information they need to conduct their investigations. And you should know we'll do that today and tomorrow. And if I'm confirmed with the State Department, we'll do it there as well.
In the time that I have remaining, I want to come back to the authorization question in Syria. You said you believe that the president has the authority to strike Syrian forces. What is this? What statutory authorization do you draw on to come to that conclusion?
Senator, I believe that the president has that authority. He certainly has it under Article 2 of the Constitution.
What's the limiting factor then with respect to Article 2 powers if he can strike Syrian forces with no existing statutory authorization?
Senator, there are reams of law review articles written in answer to that very question. It's a highly fact-based analysis. There are scores of attorneys strewn throughout the CIA, throughout the State Department, throughout the White House, throughout the Justice Department.
Well, give me one limiting factor.
Yes, Senator, I would, if you make a commitment, right? If you make a commitment that would be traditionally viewed as a classical case for war, then the Constitution so requires. This has been a tussle between the executive and legislative branch for an awfully long time, and you know my views. I think it was Senator Kaine who said that I have, coming from the place that you do and on the congressional side, have deep respect for what it is that you all are looking for.
So normally a limiting factor would be an imminent threat or an attack on the United States. And
right, there's a very definition in the War Powers Act, right? There's a statutory definition that's contained there as well. I can't recite it jot and tittle today, but there's
it's an attack on it's an attack. The War Powers refers to an attack on the United States. There's been no attack on the United States from the Syrian regime, correct?
Senator, that's correct.
And there's no imminent threat of attack on the United States from the Syrian regime.
Yeah, Senator, I'm just trying to be very careful. Yes, I think that's correct.
At the end of my time, but I might want to follow up on this. I don't think we're at to the bottom of this question yet. Thank you.
Senator, these are just I'm trying to. You're asking me today to conduct complex legal analysis with legal conclusions, and so I know it's important, and so I'm trying to do my best. I'm at the same time trying to make sure that I don't have some statement I made that I parsed the language.
I understand, but to the extent that there is not an identifiable constraint on Article 2 power, then we are all out of the business of declaring war.
If I could, I'll use another 30 seconds of my time. I think that even on this committee, there's wide disagreement over that. I know Senator Shaheen and myself, I saw our public statements over the last few days, both agree that the president has the ability to make surgical strikes. President Obama carried on for months activities against Libya that I disagreed with on a policy basis, but he had that authority to do so. At least he claimed he did. So look, I think this is a subject of debate, and I think it's prudent of our witness to not try to analyze the very details of that. On our own committee, we would debate that on both sides of the aisle at length. But I thank you for having this conversation. I look forward to the follow-up. Senator Brasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Pompeo, congratulations on your nomination. Thank you for your service to the nation. Thanks for coming by and visiting with me, taking the time to discuss the critical issues of national security. And I concur completely with you in the presidential authority to use military force in Syria. And I wanted to stay with Syria for a few moments, if I could, because what we've seen, Assad has continued to use chemical weapons, killing thousands, and most recently, it sounds like another attack a few days ago. Reports emerged from the regime to killing men, women, children outside of Damascus, another terrible chemical weapon.
We have been watching part of the confirmation hearing, because it's ongoing at this point, of CIA Director Mike Pompeo and a 21-person committee on the Hill in the Senate, talking with him about what they want to know about his past, his future, his perspectives on things as he is being considered for Secretary of State. And you've got Senator Barrasso talking right now. One of those senators on the Hill today is standing by to talk with us. Republican Senator Tom Cotton sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee and is a big backer of Pompeo's nomination. So we just want to take a break and step away from some of what's going on in testimony and get some of your opinion about this. Senator, this has been riveting in just the last few minutes. Very rapid topic changes, so on and so forth, but specifically when it comes to Syria and what we'll do there. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on first to discuss Director Pompeo's nomination to be our Secretary of State. I do strongly support him. I believe he'll be confirmed in the next couple of weeks, and I think he'll be a great Secretary of State, not only for the President, but for our country. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee is addressing some of the weightiest issues we face as a nation and we can face, things like military action against Syria or threats that nations like Russia or China pose to us. I can personally say that I know Mike Pompeo understands those threats and the need to have sound, effective diplomacy backed up by the credible threat of military force, because I served with him in the House of Representatives. I've traveled the world with him and sat across the table with heads of state, and I've worked very closely with him as the director of the CIA while I've been on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I think he's handled himself very well today. He's been respectful towards members of the committee. He's addressed their questions as best he can, given the constraints of not being able to see the future and see all of the challenges that we might face during his tenure as Secretary of State.
You know, Senator Cotton, what was interesting, too, that he was asked several times about the Russia investigation and ongoing, and whether or not he'd met with the special counsel Robert Mueller. And time again, as the CIA director, he cannot comment, he said, at this point. What did you make of it?
Well, I think a lot of Democrats on the committee, just like Democrats in Congress, are obsessed with this matter. I don't know many Arkansans that are obsessed with it. They worry not only about their own jobs, but about America being safe in the world. That's what Mike Pompeo has dedicated himself to, not just as a CIA director, but over a lifetime, to include career or service as an Army officer. I can tell you, as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, under Director Pompeo, the CIA has been extraordinarily forthcoming to provide us all of the documents and access to potential witnesses we might need. I can also tell you that the CIA has a relatively limited role in our review. This is much more a matter for the FBI, which is our main counterintelligence agency. But to the extent that our review on the Intelligence Committee has depended on the CIA, Director Pompeo has provided us access to the kinds of documents and even raw intelligence that we rarely see in Congress. And I think that reflects well on him, and also shows that once he's at the Department of State, he will also work with Congress in that cooperative fashion.
Senator Cotton, are there any bumps that you see so far on the road to confirmation? There have been so many topics that have come up and some interesting points and back and forth, but is there anything that you see on the horizon and you say, oh, that's going to be a problem?
No, none at all. I think Director Pompeo has handled himself very well. He's answered questions to the very best of his ability and within the constraints of having a public hearing where you can't discuss classified information.
Sure.
He earned 15 Democratic votes to be director of the CIA just last year. I see no reason why all 15 of those Democrats wouldn't want to vote for him in this position. And for that matter, for the other Democrats who opposed him last year, he now has 16 months of track record running an executive branch agency. And by all accounts, he's done that exceptionally well. He's helped restore high morale to the CIA. Frankly, the State Department could use that right now, too.
You know, Senator Corker brought up something, and we've heard it a couple of times today, and it has to do, I want to go back to Syria, because the president is promising that he'll have an answer for the nation in the short little while. We're waiting. We're perched to hear what that's going to be, what it will look like that we will do to Syria in regard to the suspected use of chemical weapons on citizens. Senator Corker says the president has the authority to make surgical strikes. We saw President Obama do this in Libya, even though Corker says, I didn't agree with the politics of why he did it, but he said he had the right to do it. What is the takeaway for the American people with this discussion today with Pompeo on that?
Well, first, I believe, as Director Pompeo said, the president always has the inherent authority under our Constitution to employ military force to protect the United States interests. That's been the case going back to the beginning of our republic, when we were fighting the Barbary pirates off the coast of Libya and the Mediterranean. Congress has co-equal power. We could defund those operations, and that's happened over the course of our history as well. It almost happened in the Iraq War just in the last decade. That's the simple and equal power that Congress has, but there's no doubt that any president has the constitutional power to employ force to protect U.S. interests.
As they are continuing with the hearing today with Mike Pompeo for Secretary of State, it was so great to get you to talk with us there from the Hill. Senator Cotton, thank you very much for your perspective and filling in some of the color that's going on, because I would imagine every senator is probably discussing this at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's bring in now Tom Rogan, who covers foreign policy and politics for the Washington Examiner, and will no doubt write about this today and what the news points are. So just moments ago, we saw Senator Rand Paul talking with Mike Pompeo about whether or not he would follow the president's lead on getting in and out of war situations. Your take on that and what you will write?
Well, I think it was good to be with you, Harris. I think if you look at the baseline of constitutional law, the interpretation of that, the action of that in terms of various presidents acting without congressional authority. The baseline is that you can engage as the commander-in-chief in short-duration operations without first going to Congress, especially if it pertains to a matter of national security. I would say under Syria, because of the need to deter chemical weapons use around the world. Again, as tragic as it is about the civilians dying, this is not ultimately about the civilians. It is about the principle of deterrence. And so in that regard, I think, I disagree with Senator Paul, and to some degree I will be writing that.
There were a number of issues that came up that were kind of outside of where we think the Secretary of State would weigh in on something. Cory Booker of New Jersey, Senator Booker brought up LGBT issues with this candidate. Talk to me about that. What is the takeaway for the American people on that?
Well, look, there are various perspectives on that issue. The problem I find, and you saw some Democrats ask really serious questions on China, for example. The problem is Cory Booker and others who are either trying to gin up their base, get liberal donors involved, are playing to those cards. And yet it undercuts the notion that America has a role in terms of its members of Congress asking tough questions of the executive branch about matters of import. And clearly, when you are interviewing someone who wants to be the next chief diplomat of the United States, I would suggest that LGBTQ rights are not as serious as concerns about Russia or China or Iran, or indeed our relationships with our allies that Senator Booker claims President Trump so disregards.
Sure. It's an interesting set of topics that we have seen roll out among the 21 senators here on that committee, who will ask first two questions and then they'll get a second go around after they eventually take a break. We're covering it all. Tom, thank you very much. President Trump set to host a national security meeting today at the White House following that alleged chemical weapons attack in Syria. So it is going to come up again. There's been a hearing today already. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis at that hearing said he has multiple options for the president to consider. So now they will come together this afternoon and talk about those options. And they're talking about it with the potential Secretary of State Mike Pompeo as well. Stay close. Fox News alert now. President Trump is gearing up to meet with top national security advisors at the White House in just the next little while this afternoon on the heels of that horrific attack in Syria. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis says he is prepared to present multiple options to the commander-in-chief, as he now believes it was, in fact, a chemical attack based on the evidence he's seen. President Trump says he's getting close to making a final decision. Watch.
We're having a meeting today on Syria. We're having a number of meetings today. We'll see what happens. We're obviously looking at that very closely. It's too bad that the world puts us in a position like that. But, as I said this morning, we've done a great job with ISIS. We have just absolutely decimated ISIS. But now we have to make some further decisions. So they'll be made fairly soon.
These are some of the news points that have been percolating, Jennifer Griffin, at the Pentagon while we've been in that hearing about the confirmation for Secretary of State. And this is big news now. Bring it to us.
Well, Harris, you were talking about the authorization for the use of military force, and House Speaker Paul Ryan said just moments ago that the president has all the authorities he needs to call for a Syrian strike if he chooses to. That national security meeting with the president that you mentioned is slated for 2:30 p.m. today. Defense Secretary Mattis has been on the Hill all morning testifying to the House Armed Services Committee. Mattis said repeatedly no decisions have been taken yet regarding military strikes against Syria. He did go further than he did yesterday as to whether a chemical weapons attack had occurred.
I believe there was a chemical attack, and we're looking for the actual evidence. The OPCW, this is the Organization for the Chemical Weapons Convention. We're trying to get those inspectors in probably within the week. You know the challenges we face, where Russia has 6 times in the UN rejected and made certain that we could not get investigators in.
The OPCW that he referred to just announced they hope to have their inspectors on the ground working in Syria on Saturday, April 14th. In the meantime, the USS Donald Cook is off the coast of Syria with about 75 Tomahawk missiles on board and more than a dozen surface-to-air missiles. It is joined by at least 1 British submarine armed with cruise missiles. The British cabinet signed off on the British joining the U.S. and French efforts. The French have deployed a frigate to the eastern Mediterranean armed with 16 cruise missiles and another 16 surface-to-air missiles. The British Prime Minister, Theresa May, has ordered British submarines to move into position to help. The USS Harry S. Truman departed Norfolk, Virginia yesterday, accompanied by 7 U.S. warships. The Russians have said they will shoot down any missiles fired at Syria and strike any warship involved. Mattis said the U.S. will not engage in the Syrian civil war.
There's a tactical concern, ma'am, that innocent people, we don't add to any civilian deaths and do everything humanly possible to avoid that. We're trying to stop the murder of innocent people. But on a strategic level, it's how do we keep this from escalating out of control?
UN Ambassador Nikki Haley on Capitol Hill as well remarked there are no easy answers to Syria, and last time 59 Tomahawks didn't do the trick. Fox News has also learned there are now U.S. warships in the Red Sea in striking range as well. Harris?
Wow, I'm taking the list of all the things that you said that are firepower there. The list has gotten long. Jennifer Griffin, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Republican Congresswoman Martha McSally is a member of the House Armed Services Committee and a veteran of our military. She had the opportunity to actually question Defense Secretary Mattis during that hearing a couple of hours ago. Great to have you on board as the news is cooking along now. So we are monitoring that meeting with Mike Pompeo and confirmation for Secretary of State. And now let's talk about this with Syria. Are we about to go to war in Syria?
Well, good to see you, Harris. It was about 2.5 hours that I was in the hearing with Secretary Mattis and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This was one of many topics of the dangerous world we face. And it's clear they're going through a decision-making process. I planned a lot of these options in the past for other contingencies where they're providing alternatives to the leadership, to the commander-in-chief, to include military alternatives plus other diplomatic and economic means in order to address this issue. So I think they're working through that decision-making process. It's very important that we identify what our objectives are. I thought Secretary Mattis spoke clearly on that today, and that we identify them and we're carrying them out while realizing that, look, President Trump inherited a mess in Syria from the failures of the last administration. If you remember,
no, we do.
Secretary Kerry said all the chemical weapons were gone, but it's a mess, and something needs to be done, though.
Congresswoman, forgive me, our time is so tight because we're going to go back to that hearing momentarily. I just want to get this question in. What is the difference between a surgical strike, and you talk about objectives, and going to war? I'm not saying getting involved in civil war with them, but the Russians are threatening to shoot down missiles that we would send.
Yeah, again, these are the discussions that need to go on, that we need to have clear objectives. I think in this case, it's likely to be to punish Syria for violating international law, to make sure that chemical weapons cannot be used. They've just been used in London as well. Russia is continuing to be a problem in the region and is really stalling the diplomatic way forward on this. Russia needs to be sent a message as well that we are not going to stand by like the last administration, but we have to be very clear that we don't escalate into some sort of conflict with Russia while we show strength. So these are all the considerations with Ambassador Bolton on board and Secretary Mattis. I know the president will be getting good advice to make sure that they're addressing these issues when they decide what to do.
Congresswoman, you're along with me now for some breaking news. We can confirm the White House is confident that chemical weapons were used in Syria. Now, that means something in terms of those options that you put together. What does it mean?
It does. Look, for the first step for any of these issues is to work with our allies, look at the intelligence, to discern and ensure that that's actually what we see the evidence of through the reports by third parties. And so if they're using those words right now, that means the intelligence has showed for sure chemical weapons have been used.
How does that change what we will do?
This is a violation of international law. It's a violation of the Chemical Weapons Treaty. And look, the world cannot stand by with our allies. Something needs to be done using elements of power, which will likely include military, but also diplomatic and economic.
All right. I don't know how many people know this, but you have been in a cockpit and you have put these missions together for going in. Talk to me seriously now, very points, easy to understand what our options are and how surgical this really could be.
Well, I'm not the commander-in-chief, but I will tell you that the options would be, with our allies, strategically hitting military targets in Syria to diminish their capabilities to do this again, and also to send a strong message to Assad that these will not go unanswered, and a message to Russia that we're not going to sit by while they continue to obstruct the diplomatic process and engage in chemical weapons themselves in London. And so I think the targets will be very tight. We will do everything to minimize any collateral damage. We do not target civilians. There will certainly be notifications and other things in order to make sure there's deconfliction of airspace, and do all we can to ensure it doesn't escalate and make sure Putin knows, do not get involved. You are a problem in this situation, and you need to not escalate this really environment that you've helped create.
Well, we saw the president tweet that out about, be careful, basically, I'm paraphrasing now, be careful who your friends are. This guy in Syria is killing people.
Exactly.
Thank you. It's so good to have your perspective and experience along as we break the news today about the president and the White House being confident that chemical weapons were used in Syria. Congresswoman McSally, thank you.
Thanks, Harris.
We are awaiting remarks now from President Trump on tax cuts for American workers, and we will see if he then further remarks on what's happening now with Syria. We'll bring it to you live when it happens. Stay close. President Trump is denying a report that he wanted to fire Robert Mueller back in December amid reports that the special counsel had issued another round of subpoenas targeting the president's business dealings. Here's what he tweeted today. I wanted to fire Robert Mueller in December, as reported by the failing New York Times. I would have fired him if I wanted to. Just more fake news from a biased newspaper. Meanwhile, a proposal from a group of bipartisan senators to protect Mueller's job could reportedly come up for a vote next week. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. Can they block what the president wants to do with a vote?
You know, it's a very interesting question. There's a lot of legal authority that says the president is the head of the executive branch, and he can fire somebody who he believes is misbehaving in the executive branch. He's the only one in the executive branch that answers to the public. There's other legal authority to say that if he fires somebody that's pursuing him, he might be interfering with a legitimate criminal prosecution. That's called obstruction of justice, and that's a crime. In my view, the Congress cannot restrain him from firing Bob Mueller, but public opinion can and probably will.
Okay, so those live in two different lanes. Talk to me about the public opinion that could step in on this. And does it exist?
Well, I mean, Lincoln once said, with public opinion, nothing can fail, and without it, nothing can succeed. If it appears that Mueller is gravely overreaching, and if it appears that the president is being victimized by a gravely overreaching prosecutor, it doesn't to me, but if it does to the public, the president could get away with firing him.
How does that work? It's not like you're going to take a vote from the public. What, are you just going to look at some favorite polls?
Yes, you're going to make a determination, as political people will make a determination as to whether he can get away with it, or whether it would put him deeper in hot water. Here's what he can't get away with. He can't end the prosecution, the investigation. It's not a prosecution. It may never be, or it may be, just because he wants to end it. The law requires it comes to a lawful end.
He hasn't said that, though. So where are Democrats coming from? And we've gone down a political road now.
He fires Bob Mueller, and Rod Rosenstein replaces him with Mike Chertoff, I'm just throwing a name out there, former Secretary Chertoff would pick up where Mueller left off. And the president would be in no better and perhaps worse position than he would have been had he not fired him. This is the Nixon model, when Nixon had the then Solicitor General, Robert Bork, of fame for another reason later in his life, fire Archibald Cox. It was replaced by Leon Jaworski, which ended up in Nixon's resignation.
All right. One thing that you and I have talked about off camera is the fact that many of the people involved in the sort of succession line of firing were put in place by this president.
All right, so the law says that Bob Mueller can only be fired by the person who appointed him. That's Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein has said privately and publicly, if the president asked him to fire Bob Mueller, he'd resign. The next person involved is a career DOJ person whom the president did not put in. The next person...
Can I step in with one question? Just because we've been talking so much about bias at the FBI and DOJ and the suspicions of that. If you get to that career DOJ person, where are we in all of this?
Well, you know,
and I'm not trying to disparage anybody by assuming anything. I'm telling you that there are investigations going on right now looking at whether or not there was bias against this president at the FBI and DOJ. So when I hear the words career DOJ...
I don't blame you for reacting that way. I don't think that's the case with this person. But even if it were, the worst case scenario is this person says, I'm not going to fire him either. I'm going to resign. The next person is the Solicitor General, whom the president did appoint. We're going to eventually find some janitor in the basement of the Justice Department who's willing to fire Bob Mueller because they're going to go through everybody until somebody does it.
Judge Knaps, thank you.
I heard them say rap. Okay.
We're awaiting President Trump's remarks now from the Rose Garden of the White House. We'll bring you that live as it happens. Also, we are monitoring the situation on the Hill with his pick for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who's currently the CIA director. He's been taking senators' questions on the Hill. They've reached a break. When they come back from break, we'll bring you that. Stay close. Your screen right now, the Rose Garden to the left there at the White House. You see people assembled. The president is expected to talk about tax cuts and remarks today, but we know just a short time ago the White House says that it has confidence that chemical weapons were used on citizens inside Syria. The president imminently expected to make a decision about what to do in response to that. He may remark on that as well. So we will bring you the president of the United States at the Rose Garden as it happens. Meanwhile, the Justice Department is finally turning over a newly clean copy of the FBI memo that we know kickstarted the Russia investigation. Handed it over to the members of the House Intel Committee. This after Chairman Devin Nunes threatened legal action, including impeachment, against Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein and FBI Director Christopher Wray if he didn't get it. Joining us now is Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. I get to talk with you along the way as things come together. Tell me about the significance of this coming together.
Well, it shows you just how obstructionist Justice Department and the FBI have been with a Republican Congress. Remember, presumably the parties control the executive branch and the Congress. You would think they're at war with each other in terms of Democrat versus Republican. This is a deep state. This is a deep state obstruction, and it's shameful that this Justice Department and this FBI only turned over this document after being threatened with contempt, and the officials at issue being threatened with impeachment, namely the FBI director, Mr. Rosenstein.
So, Tom, talk with me about this memo in particular. And we call it a clean memo because it has not been redacted.
Well, there's no classified information in it, so there was really no reason to withhold it other than, I think, for embarrassment reasons. Look, there's a demonstrated history with this Justice Department and FBI that records withheld about the targeting of Donald Trump were withheld not for reasons of classification or security or law enforcement purposes, but because they exposed misconduct by Justice Department and FBI officials, specifically during the Obama administration. Some of those folks are still around. Some of them may have book tours they're about to embark on. So it'll be very interesting to see the details in these memos, and I encourage Congress to release this material immediately.
So when this material comes out, along with everything that Judicial Watch is pressing for, what part of the picture does this fill in now?
Why was it the Justice Department and FBI took the extraordinary step to investigate the Trump campaign, given the information they had that Russia, quote, was targeting the Trump campaign or Donald Trump with malicious lies, specifically through the dossier. They've told us that the reason they started up the investigation wasn't because of the dossier, was because of this investigation or this intelligence that a Trump advisor may have talked to someone in a bar about the Clinton emails. But that's not, to me, a sufficient reason to investigate the Trump campaign and initiate an FBI inquiry. So it'd be very interesting to see what the details are. And the suggestion is they didn't have much to go on, and the document's going to show that, and it's going to lead to more questions as to why they were actually doing it. They were maybe doing it for partisan reasons as opposed to law enforcement and counterintelligence reasons.
Tom Fitton, I'm going to cut our conversation short today from Judicial Watch, but I appreciate your time. We've got a bit of breaking news. It's kind of how this hour has gone. We want to go back now to the Senate hearing with CIA Director Mike Pompeo, who is being considered for confirmation for Secretary of State. Let's watch.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Pompeo, thank you again for your testimony. I think you've done an incredible job today challenging us and also being very forward in your answers. And I appreciate that today, and it will serve you well as Secretary of State, and I look forward to supporting you. There's been some news that was made while you were in the testimony earlier today by President Trump. I think he has directed, according to news reports, Ambassador Lighthizer, along with Larry Kudlow, to open up the new possibility of re-engaging in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And so, leading into this question on China, the National Security Strategy released in 2017 says China and Russia challenge American power, influence, and interest, attempting to erode American security and prosperity. China seeks to displace the United States in the Indo-Pacific region, expand its reaches of state-driven economic model, reorder the region in its favor. China is using economic inducements, penalties, influence operations, and implied military threats to persuade other states to heed its political and security agenda. I talked earlier about the clear militarization of the South China Seas, talked about the fact that they are now conducting, or at least planning to conduct, live fire exercises in the Taiwan Straits of Taiwan. Can you talk about this, perhaps including even TPP, how that can counter China's influence, and what we need to do to make sure that we have a policy toward China?
Senator, that news was news to me, but I've watched the administration, and I by the way, my record was clear. I supported TPP when I was a member of Congress. There is an economic component to what China is trying to do. We need to be engaged. It is a diplomatic component to the economic activity as well. We need to be deeply engaged there, and I'm confident this administration will do that.
Thank you, Director Pompeo. Talking a little bit about Southeast Asia and our challenge right now, how many fighters right now from Southeast Asia do you think are in Syria today?
How many
Islamic fighters from Southeast Asia do we estimate are in Syria?
Senator, I don't recall the number. There are many.
And have we seen those go and return to Southeast Asia as well?
We have.
And how is our coordination with those Southeast Asian nations, Philippines, other places, in terms of addressing, monitoring, and combating as they move back?
Without giving too much detail, it is better in some places than in others. But in much as we do with our European partners and our partners in the Middle East, we do our best to track these terrorists as they move around the world so that we can together identify ways to prevent them from conducting their terror.
The fighters that may have been in Southeast Asia went to Syria and then returned. Do we know if any of them were involved in the incidents in Marawi?
Senator, I don't recall sitting here today.
Thank you. In regards to Taiwan, the Taiwan Travel Act signed into law March 18, 2018, supported that. Commend the president for signing that. Do you agree with the policy?
Fox News Alert pulling away from that hearing. We'll go back to it as it makes news. The president of the United States in the Rose Garden.
I want to thank all of the members of Congress here today who helped us pass these incredible tax cuts and reforms into law. You know, for years they haven't been able to do it. They were unable to do it, not since Ronald Reagan, and we topped that one. But they called it tax reform. We discussed that, right? We discussed it. I said we have to call it not tax reform. Nobody knows what that means. That could mean a tax increase. We have to call it tax cuts. So we call it Tax Cuts and Jobs. And guess what? We got it passed. I also want to recognize a great friend of mine and a man who's doing a fantastic job, Vice President Pence. Mike, stand up. Thank you. And members of my cabinet, they are working tirelessly. We have Secretary Mnuchin, Secretary Acosta, Administrator McMahon. Thank you. Please stand up. And all of the members of Congress and senators, thank you, and congressmen and women, thank you very much. Most especially, I want to thank all of the American workers in the audience. We have a lot of them who have traveled here from all over the country. They wanted to be with us. This event is dedicated to you, the hardworking Americans who make our nation run. You love your country. You provide for your family. You're proud of everything you've done. You've got that great extra strength that other people don't have. And you cherish a wonderful thing called our great American flag. And now, because of our tax cuts, you can keep more of your hard-earned money. Larry Kudlow is very happy about that, sitting in the front row. Right, Larry? Good. He says yes. Married couples won't pay a dime of income tax on their first $24,000 of income. A typical family of four earning $75,000 a year will see their tax bill slashed in half. Nobody thought they'd ever see that. Have a lot more money to spend. And we didn't get one Democratic vote. That's tough. In fact, I have to say, they want to increase your taxes. If they ever got into power, they have stated that they want to increase your taxes and spend money on things that you don't even want to know about. So we've doubled, very importantly, the child tax credit. They want so many other things, and people have wanted other things, and frankly, we fought very hard. We've taken care of our military for the first time in many, many years. $700 billion. We're going to have the strongest military that we've ever had. And can you think of a better time to have it, right? This is when we need it. We're going to have it. $700 billion, and next year, $716 billion. Also in that bill, $6 billion for opioid and helping us out with that horrible, horrible problem. The fact is, we don't care about the donors and the special interests. We only care about you and your family and really making America great again. That's what we care about. That's why we're here. From the day I took the oath of office, I've been fighting to drain the swamp. And sometimes it may not look like it, but believe me, we are draining the swamp. And there are a lot of unhappy people. You can see that every day. All you have to do is turn on the news. Every time you see me hit, you know that I'm draining the swamp. And people don't like it. But we're also defending the American worker. We're making incredible trade deals. We're taking NAFTA, one of the worst deals ever made in the history of trade, and we are redoing it. And it will be a fair deal for the Americans. We lost thousands of factories and millions of jobs because of NAFTA. Thousands, think of it, thousands of factories, millions of jobs. We're turning it around. Already Chrysler's coming back with auto plants. Many companies are now in Michigan, Ohio, different places, Pennsylvania. They're building beautiful, brand new auto plants. Nobody thought they'd ever see that happen. We've created 3 million new jobs since the election. Unemployment claims are at their lowest level in nearly 50 years. Think of that, 50 years. Something I'm very proud about, unemployment rates for Hispanics and African Americans have reached The lowest levels ever recorded. Ever recorded. Think of that. Very proud of it. Remember, I used to say at rallies, what do you have to lose? Guess what? What do you have to lose? You have the lowest levels ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics. I'm very, very happy about that. And by the way, for women, the lowest levels in 19 years. So we have really good numbers. And something a lot of people didn't think was going to happen, wages are rising at the fastest pace in over a decade. We're cutting record numbers of regulations. We've cut more regulations in a year and a quarter than any administration, whether it's 4 years, 8 years, or in one case, 16 years. Should we go back to 16 years? Should we do that? Congressman, can we have that extended? You know, the last time I jokingly said that, the papers started saying, he's got despotic tendencies. No, I'm not looking to do it. Unless you want to do it, that's okay. We're also unleashing American energy and American energy independence. We're now an exporter of energy. We're doing 10 million barrels a day. Nobody thought they'd see this. 10 million. In fact, it's going to now be 10.6 million.